What is up, everybody? Welcome into the Staple Show. Shout, a Buffalo football podcast, Wednesday, December 31st. Let us be the first to say it, although you've probably been hearing it all day. Happy New Year. We are almost to 2026. We're almost to the 2025-26 playoffs, Ryan Talbot. Things are cooking up here. We're going to get to a bunch of different topics on today's show. I want to talk a little bit about Josh Allen, what we've heard from Sean McDermott, Joe Brady, Josh Allen, we heard from today. A little bit back on his game. I want to talk about a couple defensive players that I think are going to be really important to this playoff push. We'll get to an Ed Oliver update and the rest of the injury front and maybe a little Stranger Things prediction time. The finale comes out at 8 o'clock. Do you notice that we're going live at 7 o'clock? We'll be done long before everybody can go stream the Stranger Things finale. We'll get into that as well. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. And as you said, happy New Year's Eve to everyone watching live. Happy New Year's Day to those of you that download and listen to the pod the morning after. So like you said, looking forward to ringing in 2026.
It has been, I want to get to the Josh Allen stuff, but I want to say this has been the by far most successful year of Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. Across all platforms. On the downloading side, we set a new record for downloads this year. We just passed our 800th episode, Ryan. Did you realize that?
I did not realize
Yeah,
that.
we are on episode 804 here. So we're cruising. We'll probably be to episode number 1000 sometime during like early next season. So that'll be pretty cool. Maybe right around the new stadium time. So a lot to get to. We'll get into more of the final game at the Ralph, at Rich Stadium, at Highmark, whatever you call it. We'll get more into that on Friday on the preview episode of Shout. But I want to start with Josh Allen because I think going back and watching that game back, that was an uncharacteristic Josh Allen performance.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, there's a couple things at play. Number one, you're going up against one of the best defenses in the NFL, and if not the best defensive line, one of them. And when they're whole, I don't necessarily know that there's an argument to be made that they're not the best. I mean, Jalen Carter was destructive, dominant in that game. He was every bit the part. And some of the pieces that they've added, Jalen Phillips now back in the mix for them after they traded from him for the Dolphins. They were really good up front, but I thought it was an uncharacteristic game of Josh Allen from how many opportunities that he passed up on. And I sent you a play that I wanted to discuss here for a minute because you mentioned in the text that you brought it up on the post-game show. It's the 3rd and I believe it was 8 from the 27 or 28 yard line. You're in scoring range. So you're down 13-0. You know that this is a situation where on 3rd and long, you have to come out of this play with either a chance to kick a field goal, although, we know what happened with Michael Badgley, so that's its own little problem, or a chance to put yourself into a spot to maybe go for it on 4th down. And Josh Allen goes back to pass. And if you go back and watch this play, I have a Joe Brady complaint in it. In number one, the bunch wide receivers to the right all run to the same spot. And I feel like if you go back and watch a bunch of the plays from the all 22 angle, you'll see this a lot in the Bills offense. And I think that's something that if I had a complaint about Joe Brady in the passing game, that to me at times is what it is. I don't think that there's enough nuance, whether it be on the receiver's end, in the routes that they're running, the timing, when they break out into the route, all those kinds of things. If you're Josh Allen looking to your right and they're getting home with 4 all day long, you need a little bit more in terms of options. But to your point, he had an option. Ty Johnson down in the left flat that he completely doesn't look at. He ends up getting sacked for a 19-yard loss. The Bills have to punt. That to me was the story of his game for the most part, outside of those last 2 drives, were opportunities there against a team where you needed to take what you got when you got it, and he just didn't do that enough.
Yeah, going back, rewatching that game, I had it like a 50-50 split in terms of who was at fault for the loss between Josh Allen and Joe Brady. Brady with the play designs in terms of the passing game, not great. And to your point, that specific play, 3 wide receivers bunched in the same area where Allen, had nowhere to throw because they were all covered, first of all. And then you had all these other defenders that were kind of grouped in there because of the way that play was designed. So whether a receiver ran the wrong route or, the depth just wasn't there properly, he had 3 guys that were pretty much taken out of the equation because of the design of the play. But yes, he also had Ty Johnson open immediately on the play. And then when he first started scrambling, he was open again. I'm not going to sit here and say Ty Johnson picks up the first down, but he gets a few yards out of it at least and sets you up for a field goal attempt if he doesn't move the chains there. So, that was a mistake by Josh Allen not taking the play underneath. Earlier in the game, the fumble that he had Jackson Hawes to his right along the sideline. Could have dropped it off there, lived for another down, especially after a 50-yard completion that he had on that drive. And instead, you can say tuck rule, you can say incomplete pass. The officials called it a fumble, and it ended up being a big turnover because it was a short field. The Eagles scored a touchdown on it. So Allen made some uncharacteristic mistakes. Joe Brady's play designs are less than ideal in terms of the passing game, and you put those two things together against an elite defense, and that spells disaster.
The other thing too that I wanted to kind of dig into after that game was, Tom Brady was ultra critical of the Bills offense as they were kind of floundering on the broadcast. There was one segment in the third quarter, I think about 8 minutes left, where there was a sequence of plays, and there was actually a fan that took the broadcast and then went play by play exactly what Brady was critiquing the Bills on, and he called into question Josh Allen's pre-snap protection setting was an issue. He wasn't doing a good enough job to protect himself. And to Allen's credit, when he was asked about the sacks today, he took a lot of the responsibility on his own part. Like, got to get rid of the ball sooner. Didn't get too much into the setting protections, but he said that in the past. Like, he's got to do a better job of that. I asked Joe Brady about this, and this is another critique I have of Joe Brady. And I asked him about this on Monday, and his response was just lauding Josh Allen's ability pre-snap, almost like scared to criticize 17. And listen, it's part of his job to pump up his player, he wants to, make sure that confidence stays high. But I think we could call a spade at times. And I think when you have a guy like Tom Brady who's calling out your quarterback in the broadcast, it hasn't been good enough. And I think that the criticism for Joe Brady, when it's been at its most intense, from my end anyway, it's like this inability to maybe deliver the kind of messaging to Josh Allen that needs to be delivered. And we're not in the building, so I'm not going to sit here and act like I know exactly what those exchanges are like going on between them. And, I have another take on Josh Allen we'll get to in a minute, where I think everything's going to be okay. So it's not the end of the world. But like, you think back to like the Brian Dable era and the way that Josh Allen was able to take coaching from him, but also take direction from him. And at times it was really intense criticism from Brian Dable. I mean, this has been well chronicled. And I just think that for him to come out and say that he's performing at an elite level pre-snap right now, that the numbers don't bear that out, Ryan. He's been sacked a career high 40 times. And that's with an offensive line that we talk about as being one of the best pass blocking groups in the NFL. So what is it? Is it that group just completely falling off a cliff, or does Josh Allen have to bear a little bit more of that responsibility?
Needs to bear more of the responsibility. And the line is not without fault. There have been some times where they've just been pushed back and Allen has nowhere to take off to or move to. You can argue he's a little bit less mobile this year, even before the foot injury, compared to, 3 or 4 years ago when you're younger, you're faster, you might move a little bit better in terms of breaking away. Teams now are game planning for that though as well. So when your offensive line does give something up, it was hard. It's been hard for him to escape from that. But Allen has taken a ton of bad sacks this year where he simply is holding the ball too long, trying to make something happen, which I understand the thought process. In a lot of those games, the offense is probably struggling. You're trying to get your team in the game. You probably feel if you're Josh Allen, you have to be Superman more times than not. But that has led to some sacks where you've lost a ton of yards. It's led to some turnover type of plays where he's taking unnecessary hits that he really should not be taking. So he definitely deserves his fair share of the blame when it comes to the 40 sacks this year. But the offensive line is not without fault either.
Playing the blame game in the Bills offense, when it comes to, Brandon Bean for not getting a little bit more at the wide receiver position, Joe Brady with the scheming, or Josh Allen and the offensive line trying to figure it all out. At times this season could be a real headache. But if you want to take the headaches completely out of the mix this Sunday, the last game at Highmark Stadium, maybe you're hosting a tailgate or hosting a big party at home, don't get blamed for not having the most elite spread possible. Head over to Tops Friendly Markets on Slider Sunday and get ready to have it your way with King's Hawaiian at Tops. Every Sunday is an opportunity to enjoy delicious sliders made your way. And now you can win big while doing it. Vote for your favorite slider weekly for a chance to win a man cave makeover. Grab your favorite King's Hawaiian products from Tops and craft the ultimate sliders to make your Sunday even more special. Visit topsmarkets.com/slider Sunday. All right, so here's the other piece. Yep, Catherine Moore-Mile over on YouTube, also one of our Shout insiders. I went back and watched this game offensively and defensively to get ready for this show. We didn't do a show on Monday or Tuesday, and so kind of taking my time watching it back and then going back to watch the tape. And we're going to have some defensive call outs here in a little while, and a conversation that I want to have specifically on Deion Walker. But before we get there, I have a last point on Josh Allen and an observation that I think, as bad at times as it looked on Sunday, and you wrote the story afterwards, and I think you meant what this could ultimately mean for the Bills' first round matchup after losing that game and potentially avoiding one of the tougher matchups, depending on if the Houston Texans win their division. I think a loss like this unlocks a different version of Josh Allen. And I think I could probably count on one hand how many times we've seen that version of post-game Josh Allen at the podium over the course of his career. It's come after some of the most intense, like I think back to that Tampa Bay game in overtime a couple years ago. I think back to that Jacksonville game, the 9-6 game years ago, where he is just seething at the podium and we're getting 1-2 one-sentence word answers out of him. And I think this is the kind of thing that he's played his worst football now at this point. This offense has played its worst football. And to me, what I think this allows him to kind of reset and do, number one, I think he's going to get a chance to get healthy because I only expect him to play one snap this weekend. So I think that foot's going to get a little bit healthier. The ankle's going to be a little bit healthier. I think that the things that are limiting them, they're going to be able to fix for a playoff run. And here's the most important piece of it all. You're going to get alien Josh Allen. Like, he is playoff Josh Allen for a reason. This defense, Ryan, it's been a bit different over the last 3 weeks. And I think this performance unlocked a few different things for me in terms of confidence level, that it's going to be the hardest road the Bills have ever had to a Super Bowl. They're going to have to go on the road every single round. But I think it's somehow, in a weird way, come together in a way that if you're going to have to make that run, they're as built to do it, and playing the best ball on the important side of the ball, which is defense, at this time of the year that they'll need to. And I think we're about to see the best version of Josh Allen come playoff time.
I don't disagree with that. We've seen sometimes after those hard losses some brilliant performances from Allen. And like you said, a meaningless Week 18 game, he's not going to play much, if at all. One snap is pretty much what I'm expecting as well. So gives him a chance to heal up, play his best come playoff time, take out his aggression on how he performed against Philadelphia, against that first-round opponent. And depending on how everything shakes out, right now I think Jacksonville has the highest odds of being Buffalo's first-round opponent. If they stay in the 7th seed, it's the Patriots. They've already beaten the Patriots on the road this year. Obviously, the Patriots have beaten the Bills in the game as well, but we know that Buffalo can beat that Patriots team. And for Jacksonville, there's some things where I feel like the Bills offense could exploit for Jacksonville. They don't get after the quarterback extremely well, and that could bode well for Allen. And some of the way that they run the ball, they don't run the ball particularly well in Jacksonville. So there's, good things on both sides of the ball. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because who knows who they're going to play. A lot can shake out over this last weekend. But yeah, I think Allen's going to be his best version of himself. This defense, since that Patriots game, there's been a lot that I've really liked about it. Throwing out the Rolodex, changing up the defensive looks, mixing and matching personnel and packages. I think come playoff time, they are going to be more of a challenge than they've been in years past, maybe where they have been the reason why the Bills have exited the playoffs. They're playing a good brand of football right now.
Yeah, and last thing on Allen before we move on, he's only going to face one defensive front in the playoffs that even is in the realm of what we saw against the Eagles this last week, and that's the Houston Texans. And I think that Joe Brady's been a little bit stubborn in how much I think he believes in his offensive line. And the amount of 5-man in the route plays that they had even last week against the Eagles as things were mounting on them, and the lack of keeping guys in to help chip and to help give extra protection. And listen, I think to a certain level, you're paying a lot of money to some of these guys in the defensive line. Deion Dawkins didn't have a good game. And you're hoping that he could play a little bit better as we move into the playoffs against some of these elite defensive lines. I mean, Osiris Torrance had a couple snaps in this game. If you go back and watch it, you need your good players to play good against other good players at their position. And so that's a big piece of it. But when you know that, you got to figure out a way to better insulate Josh Allen, knowing that he's injured as well. Joe Brady. I mean, I think the guy that I'm really going out of that game and placing the most emphasis on needs to be better against these kinds of elite defensive lines moving forward is Joe Brady, and that's probably where I'll leave it.
Yeah, I agree with that. What the offense does come playoff time will obviously be the reason they either make a really deep run come this playoff or whether they're out after a round or two. We have seen so much inconsistency from this offense this year. When they're running the ball well, and James Cook goes over 100 yards, they're generally winning those games. Where it's not working necessarily well there, this team is struggling. So they have to be balanced, but Allen also has to turn into that playoff version of himself, which I'm fully expecting.
All right, so let's flip the conversation, the defensive side of the ball. And listen, I think Brandon Bean deserves a heavy amount of criticism for, the wide receiver room, some of the maybe misses in the draft the last couple of years that have left the Bills barren at a couple of spots depth-wise. Some of the extensions I think that you can even, we could really discuss here. You could talk about Greg Rousseau. You could talk about Terrell Bernard. I think, though, if you go back and you look at the last couple of seasons in the drafts that the Bills have had, they've found some really important pieces specifically on their defense. And the most important being this year's 4th-round draft pick, Deon Walker, who ends up being the number 1 defensive tackle on ESPN's Ben Solak's all-rookie first team. He just put out the story earlier this week, and he has Deon Walker as the number 1 defensive tackle out of an entire rookie class. And here's what he wrote about him. Walker regularly takes on 2 blockers at the line of scrimmage, creates tackle for a loss opportunities, and makes high effort pursuit plays into the boundary. He has also found more quick wins as a pass rusher than I expected. He'll get his hands into passing lanes too at his size, 6'7", 345. What is he? 6'7", 330. That's a big impediment for opposing quarterbacks. Ryan, going back and watching this Eagles game, he was a destructive force in terms of what he was doing to create opportunities for others, tackles for a loss. There was one play where on a screen pass, he got out and ran down the entire line and ends up laying a big hit on the ball carrier on the other side. Deon Walker has been an absolute home run for Brandon Bean in this 2025 NFL draft class.
And defensive tackle was one of the deepest positions in this draft class, and multiple went before the Bills even drafted in round 1, obviously. We know they took 2 in this draft class, TJ Sanders in round 2, and then Walker. And for Walker to perform the way that he has, and truly he probably has outplayed every defensive tackle that was drafted ahead of him and after him, it really does speak volumes to what the Bills saw on tape with him, being able to get him in the middle rounds and finding a player that is just a true impact guy. And, you look at that, you look at Cole Bishop, who is really coming to his own at the safety position. So there's two guys right there that are going to be cornerstone type of players for this defense as they continue to probably, move out with some of these older players, add new pieces. You have those guys. You obviously have Christian Benford, who's still very young. So there are guys that he has absolutely hit on that are playing at an extremely high level. And yes, the earlier misses are certainly hurting this team, but he also deserves a lot of praise for the ones that he's hit on.
Speaking of deserving a lot of praise, you will deserve just that from anybody in your family or your friends you're traveling with. If you head over to Amtrak.com and get yourself hooked up with one of their deals, holiday travel and beyond, they are chock full of gifts over at Amtrak.com right now, and you can make memories this holiday season. Every single ride, there are no middle seats ever. Generous luggage policy. You arrive in comfort with free Wi-Fi, staying connected on every single trip. Kids ride 50% off, and gift cards always fit at birthdays, holidays, whenever you're thinking of it. Head over to Amtrak.com for more. You mentioned a couple of really important hits at the defensive side of the ball. There's one guy that hasn't necessarily been the hit that you would give a guy credit for, a general manager credit for, and that's Dorian Williams, who to me is like, he filled in last year as the outside linebacker and looked pretty good, led the team in tackles, comes into training camp this year, loses his job to Matt Milano, and for the most part this season has been out of the rotation, been out of the mix. What's funny, though, Michael Hoyt's injury has maybe opened the door to a whole new vision for what Dorian Williams can do. And I thought that he fit into that role in this last game against the Philadelphia Eagles in a way that we haven't really seen from Dorian Williams yet. And when he's on the field, what I think he brings you is a lever of chaos for Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich to kind of unleash on opposing offenses. There's one play, I sent it out to our insiders earlier today, where he is sent on a blitz up the middle on third down, and Cover One had it earlier this week. The Bills ran 3 or 8 times in this game. 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, and 5 defensive backs, all on third down, and the numbers were just staggering. Well, Williams comes in, blows up the right tackle, 320 pounds or whatever the case may be, flying in on a stunt with Greg Rousseau. And honestly, if Rousseau is a little bit more urgent in that moment, he probably lands on the quarterback and sacks him. Dorian Williams, to me, is a chess piece that the Bills got to really lean into over the next month and figure out ways to get him on the field, especially in pass rushing situations.
Yeah, after they lost Hoyt, that was a major blow for this defense because, they signed Morgan Fox to the practice squad. He was Michael Hoyt before Michael Hoyt's role with the Rams, and it just didn't work out. One appearance, and then the Bills let him go. They haven't been able to find any kind of true defensive lineman that could take on that role, but Dorian Williams kind of getting after the quarterback, pressuring, and things like that. It is working a little bit, and he is athletic enough where you can send him and let him send the heat. I like some of these different personnel packages that the Bills are tinkering with, especially on third downs, as you mentioned, because they're finding something that works for them right now, and it's getting them off the field. And that's been the biggest Achilles heel for this defense over the years, especially come playoff time. So if they have a certain look that they can use that works to their benefit, that gives the offense more series come playoff time, that could pay off in a big time way for Buffalo, where a lot of the times the defense hasn't been able to get off the field in those meaningful matchups.
I want to get to Ed Oliver here in the injury situation. But before we get there, great insider question from Mark. What do you make of the report from Jeremy Fowler that John McDermott could be on the hot seat if the Bills don't go far in the playoffs? I think it's absurd. This might be his best coaching season yet with how little the roster has. Also absurd given how close they are to the cap and the injuries that have gouged them this season. And here's what Jeremy Fowler wrote. Some folks around the league have wondered to me whether Bills ownership might grow impatient with Sean McDermott if Buffalo doesn't make a playoff run in a year Patrick Mahomes is out of the postseason. All right, Ryan, first and foremost, I'll say that this is an absolute ridiculous report. in
Mhm.
every way, shape, and form on several different levels. Number one, take aside whether or not you think Sean McDermott might actually face, a firing squad if he doesn't go far in the playoffs and his seat's hot, whatever you want to say. The way that the report is positioned is some folks around the league. What folks? Some
Right.
janitors, some ticket clerks, some concession stand operators. Like, who are these folks that you're talking about? Because that context is really important. The Bills don't let anything get out of their building. I have not heard a legitimate report on Terry Pagula in the 8 years that I don't think there's anybody that has their finger on the pulse of what Terry Pagula is thinking, maybe outside of Tim Graham from The Athletic. I think he's the one guy that it's super plugged in, that if it was coming to him, I would pull up a seat and read that story. But, Jeremy Fowler, historically, no offense to him. I mean, I've never really conversed with him. I don't really know him. But his one claim to fame was the underrated Josh Allen story back in training camp a couple years ago. So I don't think folks inside the Bills building have the highest of esteem for Mr. Fowler. But I just think it's an odd thing to kind of throw in without a lot of context, especially knowing that on the local level, Ryan, I don't see that I think the Bills can miss the playoffs completely and Sean McDermott wouldn't get fired.
I think it would take a few really down years for the Bills to move on from McDermott, and whether Bills fans want to hear that or not is one thing, but you look at the patience that he had with Kevin Adams and that Sabres team and how many years they were just pathetic and awful, and he didn't make a move until this year, and lo and behold, now they're actually playing really good hockey and in a good spot. But with the Bills in 7 consecutive playoff appearances and being in the playoffs every year but one with McDermott as the head coach. No, I don't think this is going to turn into something where if the Bills don't go far this year, that he's on the hot seat. And like you said, who are these people? It could be someone from the Dolphins organization, someone from the Rams organization. Doesn't mean that it's anyone that's actually close to the Bills or the Bills front office, ownership, etc. So I don't put much stock into that report.
The Bean heat, where are you at with that? Like, if we're talking about the Bean heatometer, how high is it for you in terms of, I don't know, let's create a fake little hot seat meter here. Is it like medium, mild, hot? Like where are you at chicken wing wise on the Bean heatometer?
I would maybe say mild. That it would be as high as I would go, because you can sit there and say that this Bills team overperformed this year based on the roster that McDermott inherited in terms of some of the free agent signings that being made that just did not pan out whatsoever. Some of the high picks and how they have not worked out, like Keon Coleman. I still want to give Bean credit for the good moves he has made, but this roster is not nearly as good as most of the other playoff rosters that I've come to see with Josh Allen and this Bills team. So it does feel like McDermott has overachieved this year with what he's been given. And then you have to factor in the injuries too. There has been a plethora of injuries to this Bills roster, and that doesn't fall on Bean. That doesn't fall on McDermott. That might fall on the training staff after they had just moved on and kind of went from within to create this new head trainer and everything else. They could be on the hot seat, but no, I don't think either guy is going to be gone after this year. I think if you're asking me which person's seat is hotter, though, I would say Brandon Beans is hotter than Sean McDermott's.
I definitely would agree there. I think that Bean is definitely at a point, especially in terms of the court of public opinion right now. It hasn't been a good 8 months for him. Like, and Joseph with the super chat here, and that's what I was kind of going to get to. Bean's outburst on WGR with Jeremy and Joe after the draft has aged poorly. Jeremy was right. And honestly, like, I think the worst part of that for Brandon in hindsight was the temperature at which he came with in that interview. Like, he could have disagreed with the assertion that was being made in a mild mannered way, and I don't think it would have gotten nearly the kind of buzz around the league
Right.
that it did. I mean, people spent 2 months on the heels of free agency criticizing the Bills locally and nationally about them ignoring the wide receiver position. And I think a big piece of that is I don't think anybody thought it was out of the realm of possibility for Dalton Kincaid to turn into what he's been this year when on the field. He's been one of the top tight ends in the league, if not the top pass catching tight end in terms of some of the advanced metrics we've talked about. Problem is, are you really banking your offensive passing game on a guy that missed some of the most important games last season? And if he didn't miss it, he was on the field playing hurt. And I don't know if you necessarily wanted to pivot off of what you saw last year by almost doubling down on your reliance in a tight end that has had availability issues since you drafted him.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some flaws with this roster. I'm sure that the end of the season wrap, whether the Bills go very far in the playoffs or are one and done, the first question Brandon Bean is going to face from the media is about the wide receivers and the outburst that he had with the WGR hosts. And if the wide receiver room really doesn't step up in the next few weeks, which it's hard to believe that they suddenly will, in terms of the guys that were here all season long. They've been getting the most out of, Brandon Cooks last week, and he might end up being one of their highest targeted players come playoff time. He's going to face a lot of heat for that. And hopefully, I'm sure he's been prepping and preparing for it. But I think there's a lesson to be learned there in terms of how to go about things. And anyone that actually listened to that entire segment before Bean came on, they weren't really attacking it. They were just saying, oh, they must not have thought there was great value at the wide receiver position in that draft class. And to be fair, not a ton of guys in this draft class are showing out this year and being stable throughout the year in terms of guys the Bills could have had. So, you can look at it from both sides there. But yeah, Brandon Bean, in terms of the roster construction, maybe being a little bit too dependent on what he thought Dalton Kincaid could be, what he thought he had in Joshua Palmer, who they paid $13 million on average to, what they maybe thought they had in Curtis Samuel if he could stay healthy. The list kind of goes on where these guys really have not panned out, especially the guys signed in free agency. And you're depending on a late free agent addition, Tyrell Shavers, who is really kind of stepped up into his own, kind of coming on, not getting a ton of targets, but being a important asset for the receiver room from a blocking perspective and all the little things he does, and then having Shakir. So it's a real hodgepodge right now, and it shows that he truly did miss on his evaluations.
We met a young man named Nick a couple days ago at Wingnuts. He is one of our insiders from Long Island, going to Penn State, trying to get his journalism degree. So shout out to Nick. He sent along an insider chat. I was wondering if you guys think the Josh Allen approach now with Joe Brady, less turnover worthy plays, more short passes, is a better approach than the one with Brian Dable, more boom or bust plays, and which one you'd prefer he play with. Thank you. So I wanted to start off with this one and say it's interesting because the turnovers have popped up a little bit more this season, right? Like the interceptions are up after a historic year last year that I would almost argue wasn't really sustainable. And on the heels of this last game, one of my biggest criticisms of Joe Brady's operation with Josh Allen is that, yeah, he's supposed to be taking some of these shorter, checks in the offense, and he simply doesn't at times. So I don't know if that's a Joe Brady thing, if that's a Brian Dable wasn't, like clued in on how to get him locked in. He was a different player when Brian Dable was here, still kind of a young player ascending into what he's currently become. But I don't necessarily know if you need to have one specific approach with Josh Allen, reigning MVP. Like, I think there should be an element of both to his game and to an offense featuring him at this stage of his career.
I agree with that because when he completed that deep ball early in the game to Cooks, I think that made the Eagles realize they couldn't just sit on plays. They couldn't just wait for the underneath stuff necessarily. Now they were getting home with their front four, which obviously changed the math in their favor quite a bit too. But if you can hit some of those dynamic plays, that's going to help you with the Joe Brady philosophy of the underneath stuff and take what's given to you. So you do need a healthy mix there. Now, this wasn't the question, but if you're asking me which coordinator I would prefer Allen be working with, it'd be probably Dable because he could scheme guys open. We're not seeing that enough. And whether that's a talent issue that the Bills have or lack thereof at the position, or whether that's a Brady issue, time will tell. But there needs to be that mix. Allen has to be able to hit some intermediate deep shots come playoff time to keep defenses honest, because if they just go in with those bubble screens, short passes, it's going to make for some tough, it's going to be tough to score, because come playoff time, every team is good. And with the short, I don't want to call it dink and dunk, but with the short offense that Brady utilizes, you have to be perfect. A penalty really puts you behind the sticks. A mistake, a fumble, a loss, or a short gain on first down puts you behind the sticks, where that wasn't always the case with Dable here as offense coordinator, because you knew Allen was going to be looking to stretch the field more consistently.
Yeah, I think if Brady gets a head coaching job, which he's very much going to be in line for either a top college job. I don't know how many of those have been filled. I haven't been following that closely enough, but even some of the NFL jobs. I mean, he's going to be a candidate. This is not a super high profile
Right.
cycle in terms of big time names. So I think the best thing moving forward, if you can keep Aaron Kromer as the offensive line coach and then bring back Brian Dable to kind of almost bring what the offense has become full circle into, maybe some of what we saw last year from a scheming perspective, and bring those minds together. Like I would really be interested to see what a Brian Dable scheme with the Aaron Kromer fingerprints all over it would look like. To me, that is the best of both worlds. Not to demean Joe Brady at all, but I've always thought that Joe Brady, very young coordinator, didn't have a lot of really high profile work in the NFL outside of his stint with the Saints, but he was very, very low on the totem pole. Like, you think about some of the guys that have gone on to be head coaches or even high profile offensive coordinators, the Shanahans, the McVays, it felt like they really were moving up in offenses at the NFL level. I felt like, Brady was big resume bullet is LSU, and he was the passing game coordinator and the wide receivers coach. And I don't necessarily know, it's hard to really delineate like exactly who's responsible for what, but it felt at times like Brady is almost like been mentored a lot by Aaron Kromer, which isn't a bad thing. And I think in a lot of ways, this offense hums because of the synergy between them. But I also think sometimes like you need the philosophies to mesh together. I think as recently as last year, and what the Eagles were able to do with Sirianni and Kellen Moore, who came from two completely different schools.
Right. And you've seen the struggles that the Eagles have had as of late without Kellen Moore, and how sometimes you need those two different schools to come together to make it work. I agree with that. I think that, Brady deserves a lot of credit for getting this run game going, but obviously Cromer also has his hand in that for the offensive line play and the blocking ability. They are a much better run blocking unit than they are a pass blocking unit. And that's no knock on them as a pass blocking unit. They're just kind of at an elite level as run blockers. So that obviously helps and works hand in hand. You bring in someone that has a really good, passing system, and then you merge with Dable and what they can do from the running perspective of what Cromer can kind of help and incorporate. I could see this offense being a lot more dynamic in a situation like that.
Somebody mentioned, what about McDermott and Dable being like oil and water? Yeah, I think that there was a little bit of,
Friction.
frostiness to that. Yeah,
Sure.
friction to that relationship back in the day. I thought it was interesting that John Feliciano went on his podcast after Dable was let go and thought, bygones are bygones. And he thought that they'd be able to work together again. I think that sometimes when you spend a lot of time in your alphas, right? Like in a room like that, bears itself out in a certain way. And I think like sometimes what makes the heart grow stronger, right? Like what's the old adage?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Distance, right? Like
Yep. Time
I think
apart,
the
distance
time
makes the
apart
heart
and
grow
like
fonder.
realizing what you're doing separately and what it could look like doing it together, um, I think would mean something. All right, real quick, super chat. I got a couple more things I want to get to real quick. Super chat here. Maybe call Arizona about trading for Harrison Jr. I definitely think that that's something the Bills could be in on. You've talked about it on the
Yeah.
show, I think once or twice. I think going out and finding an established wide receiver should be part one of the wide receiver plan. But just because you go out and get Marvin Harrison Jr., I'm not taking wide receiver in the first round or trading up in the first round for a wide receiver off the board, Ryan. I think that's what this season has done more than anything. And we have another thing here, an insider chat from Josh Dolmas, who says, any New Year's resolutions for the Bills? My New Year's resolution is not allowing yourself to think you've crossed out a position because you have done one thing there. And they do a
Right.
good job of it in certain areas. Cornerback twice in this last draft, the Benford draft. Like, they've done this a couple of times. Defensive tackle this year with Sanders and then landing Deion Walker in the fourth. They've done it at times. But I think at wide receiver, especially, and on this offensive line, as things continue to churn, they're going to have to take multiple dart throws at positions because, listen, if you get to a point where they're both good and they both can be on the field, all right, there's worse situations to be in. You have to be able to have options once you get to the season, and especially at receiver.
Yeah, no, my resolution would be don't feel you have to draft for need over value. I think the Keon Coleman is a great example of that. They felt like they had to take an X receiver early in that draft. They let Cooper DeJean go by them and some other really good players in that situation. We saw it with Kyer Elam a few years ago as well, where everyone knew they needed a cornerback. Sometimes you have to go with who is going to make the most impact for you day one versus a need that you have. Because if you get an impact player, you'll take that 10 times out of 10, first of all, but then you can figure out any of the personnel issues that may come along with that. Well, we have an aging player at that position already. So be it. We run certain types of looks that we might have to do this. That's great. So don't just, go away from taking impact over need, which I feel like they've done sometimes early in drafts.
If you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much for making us part of your New Year's here, the night before New Year's Day. I hope everybody has a healthy, happy, safe New Year's Eve. Quickly, Ed Oliver. So the latest update on him is that, and I think Friday it's going to have to come up with Sean McDermott. It's like, all right, you have the in-game injuries, you have the injuries that are popping up in practice, and now you're having injuries popping up when guys are rehabbing. And so he's Ed Oliver rehabbing his bicep injury, and he screwed up his meniscus in his knee, had to get that cleaned up in a surgical procedure. That happened last week. He had the procedure done on Monday. And the good news is that Sean McDermott said it cloudies the timeline a little bit, but the expectation is still that it's going to still be the same kind of timeline. So they're holding out hope that he could still make it back for the playoffs at some point, if the Bills can maybe go on into a couple of rounds. To me, what this feels like, Ryan, is like best case scenario, he's available if the Bills get to like the AFC title game, because he's going to have to get back to practicing. He's going to have to get back to getting like ramped back up. I know, like, in a perfect world, you love to like run Ed Oliver out there as maybe like your fourth defensive tackle, but you also want him to be at a level where you could trust him. And, I mentioned Deion Walker on the show. I thought this was TJ Sanders' best game last game. And Fedarian Mathis, guy I was super critical of early on in his tenure. He's proven to be absolutely irreplaceable at this point in the season. And I would make an argument. I was talking about this with one of our guys, Mark. We talk to him every week, one of the big Bills fans. It's always chatting us in our DMs. Give him credit for this. He said it as well. Fedarian Mathis and TJ Sanders, it's almost like you don't want to reduce their workload anymore, even when Daquan Jones is available, just based on how well they played this last week. And so I think, getting Ed Oliver back is one thing, but you want to make sure you're getting a version of Ed Oliver that's going to add to what they've been able to kind of build with some of these guys out.
Yeah, and a meniscus injury while you're rehabbing your bicep, that'll have to be an interesting story to find out when the time comes. And I'm sure obviously training for the comeback in general, but just bad luck for the Bills all around. I think the AFC title game is a good projection of when he could come back, because like you said, you open the window, you have to practice, prepare and be ready for that situation. So unfortunate, because I think a lot of Bills fans were expecting him back come playoff time. And I thought there was a good chance for that, whether that was wild card weekend or the divisional round, but this probably pushes it back at least another week or two from any earlier expectations. But yes, they are getting some quality play from their defensive tackle room currently.
Matt Prater, full go today. He's expected to kick this weekend, so Bills fans can have a huge sigh of relief after the Michael Badgley experiment. I mean, the Bills barely waited 24 hours after the game to move on from Michael Badgley. So that's one piece. Some improving players, Jordan Phillips, Dalton Kincaid. I still don't play Dalton Kincaid this week. You have Kaleki Latu on the roster. Let him continue to get snaps. No reason to put any extra stress on that knee. Jordan Poyer not practicing, so this could be another game where maybe you work in Darnell Savage a little bit more this week.
Yeah.
He only played one snap in his Bills debut last week. Maybe he gets an opportunity to maybe even start for Cam Lewis, who's still dealing with a nagging hamstring injury himself.
Yeah, get Savage some workload. Anyone that's of any importance, do not play them this weekend in a meaningless game. Just make sure that you have your guys as ready as possible come playoff time.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. We'll come back Friday, and it's going to be a sentimental episode of Shout as we preview Bills Jets, but we're not going to really be talking about the X's and O's. We're going to be talking about Highmark Stadium. I'm bummed that our guy Ryan Talbot is not going to be coming in for this one, but you can thank the NFL for that, for making it at 425. But we'll go over some of our favorite memories covering the team in that stadium over the years. We'll talk about what Sunday is going to mean, and obviously we'll get into some of the football stuff as well. For Ryan Talbot, I am Matt Parrino. We'll see you soon.
Wait,
go ahead. Yeah.
Wait, Stranger Thing
prediction. No! We didn't do our Stranger Things segment.
Lucas is going to die. That's my big one.
Who?
Lucas. He's going to die.
Okay. So he wanted to do the segment, and he just makes it to where everybody is going to be miserable if that happens. So I'll bring him back in.
What did Vecna say about
Max in
the last episode? I have ways of hurting her, other ways of hurting her. What would hurt her more than killing off Lucas? I think he goes, the science teacher goes. I think that 8 stays in this portal with Vecna, and they say that 11 was there and dies as well, but she gets to go off to her, her waterfall and her happy ending.
Okay. That was really intense breakdown right there. I don't know, dude. I don't know what's going to happen. Here's who I don't want to die. Here's my top 3. Do not want them to die.
Steve.
Steve, number 1 with a bullet. Who else? 11. Like, that would be horrible. And Hopper. Like, those are, I think, my top 3 that I don't want to see go. But I think in the end, what ends up happening is there's got to be some type of, maybe Mike finally stands up and like he's like the big hero at the end. Because if in every season we've had 11 be a hero, we've had Will be a hero. There's also something funny going on with the sister that they just found in the room. I don't want to give it away. Sorry, spoilers if you you haven't watched the entire season up until this point. But yeah, we'll give our full analysis on what happened. I'll be very interested to see what happens with Vecna. All right, for Ryan Talbot, I'm Matt Parrino. Stay tuned for Wingnuts details. Coming up, we'll have our Wingnuts playoff show. Might end up having to be on a Friday because we'll be traveling on a Saturday for a Sunday game or vice versa. So stay tuned for that. See you soon, everybody. Take care.